William Rowe, The Problem of Evil and Some Varieties of Atheism, 1978. An influential and a very elegant article in Philosophy of Religion. Rowe is an atheist, and unlike Nietzsche, for example, Rowe is a friendly atheist. Now, the problem of evil is the problem of explaining how it is that God, if there is a God, would allow the sort of suffering and the sort of evil we see in this world. It's helpful when we talk about the problem of evil to make a distinction between natural and moral evil. Moral evil is the sort of evil that is or results from a misuse of free will by created beings. Moral evil involves human beings, or on many accounts, angels as well, making bad decisions or willfully choosing to rebel against God or to seek their own happiness at the expense of others and so on. Natural evil is evil that does not result from the misuse of free will by some created being. Tsunamis and malaria and dengue fever and Ebola and earthquakes and so on would fall into the category of natural evil. It's also important to distinguish between an argument aimed at establishing that the existence of God is improbable and an argument aimed at establishing that the existence of God is impossible given the reality of evil. Now, what Rowe is doing is an argument from natural evil, not moral evil, and it's an argument aimed at improbability, not impossibility. He realizes his argument does not prove that God does not exist. He thinks it just makes God's existence improbable. Now, the relevant kind of evil that Rowe deals with is the evil that has this characteristic. God could, if there is an omnipotent, omniscient, and benevolent God, God could prevent this kind of evil without, by preventing it, also preventing some good that is of equal or greater significance, or also allowing some evil of equal or greater significance. Evil that God could prevent without thereby also allowing something worse or equally bad, or preventing something good of equal or greater significance, which is to say pointless evil. Pointless natural evil makes the existence of God improbable, according to Rowe. Now, what sort of evil would have these characteristics? Rowe points to human and animal suffering that seems to be pointless, and he gives this very good illustration. I've known of a philosopher who was moved to tears by considering this story of the fawn, the young deer, that is burned in a forest fire and dies slowly in great pain. And note that this is not a forest fire caused by someone carelessly tossing a cigarette into pine needles. This is a forest fire caused by lightning. So natural evil, not at all moral evil. Now, Rowe further explains that what he has here is an argument with an if-then premise. If God exists, then this sort of pointless evil does not happen. This sort of pointless evil does happen, therefore God does not exist. But he realizes you could make an if-then argument go the other way. You could reason as follows. If God exists, then this sort of pointless evil does not happen. God does exist, therefore this sort of pointless evil does not happen. Now, someone making this argument has to say that there really is a point to the suffering of this fawn. It's just difficult for us to see it. And so when you have an if-then premise, and one person, in this case the believer in God, affirms the if and then affirms the then, and another person, namely Rowe, denies the then and then denies the if, you have to ask yourself, which of the second premises is more probable? In Rowe's argument, if A, then B, not B, therefore not A. Well, let's be a little more precise. If A, then not B. If God exists, then God would not allow this sort of evil. This sort of evil does exist. So let me make this a little more precise. If A, then not B, B, where B is this sort of pointless evil does take place. If A, then not B, B, therefore not A. And the religious person, Rowe says, would argue as follows. If A, then not B, A, therefore not B. So which premise, independently of these two arguments, has the greater probability, A or not B? Now, Rowe explains, A or B. Which premise has the greater probability? independently of these arguments, A or B, since B is the claim that there is this sort of evil. If A, then not B, A therefore not B, according to the theist, or if A, then not B, B therefore not A. Rowe is a friendly atheist because, even though he thinks it's far more probable that this pointless evil happens than that God exists, even though he thinks this, he's a friendly atheist because he thinks a religious person might have some decent reasons to think that his premise is more probable. He might have some good reasons to think that the existence of God is probable. Now, Rowe more or less closes his argument with this acknowledgement, by acknowledging that if certain religious people have been attentive to the arguments for the existence of God, teleological, cosmological, and so on, that he might find the existence of God rather probable and might rationally think that the existence of God is more probable than the existence of this pointless evil. Rowe just thinks that's not the case, but he grants the rationality of some possible religious folk who think contrary to what he thinks. Now, it is helpful to note that there are some ways of explaining natural evil as illusory or mythical, or not accurately described as purely natural. In the Old Testament, we have the story of Job, who seems to suffer from some natural evils, his children killed by natural disasters, he himself suffering greatly from an illness. But in this story of Job, in the Bible, Satan, angelic beings, demonic beings are involved. Well, maybe it's just Satan, but the point is angelic beings, including Satan, the fallen angel, are the cause of this natural evil. It's not really natural evil, it's moral evil. It results from the misuse of Satan's free will. Now, St. Augustine described natural evil in these terms, suggesting that some or all of it results from the misuse of free will by Satan. And other philosophers have suggested that this is a possible answer, and maybe even a probable answer for some variety of evil. It's a little more ambitious to say this explains all natural evil, and I'm not sure, quite honestly, if even Augustine would do that. But the point is, there are some ways of explaining some or all natural evil in terms of moral evil. More recently, Richard Swinburne has an interesting strategy for describing natural evil as an accompaniment to moral evil. Not exactly resulting from it, but as an accompaniment to it. And I think if you study biblical theology, you might find a third approach. If you look at Genesis 3, I believe it's Romans 8, and closing chapters of the book of Revelation in the Bible, you find the theme of creation itself being marred by human sin. And so if you take this approach, you might also find a way of explaining natural evil in terms of moral evil.